Hello there, 8th graders. This is Teacher Krishna, and welcome to our science class for week number 14. One more time, thank you a lot for all of the effort that you have done into accessing our online lessons and, of course, for completing the assignments that you have had so far. Just before we start, you have to follow the instructions we have every week. Get your physical or digital book, access the Google Classroom, download your Word document, save it in the science folder, and name it as it is specified right below. As we move, remember to take notes. That is very important so you keep track of the most important information from today's video and PowerPoint presentation. It's always important to start with our end in mind. So this week we're going to study lesson number 4, pages 90 to 95. And our end in mind is the following. Identifies the types of electromagnetic radiation in the diagram by labeling them. Okay, so keep track of that in your Word document. So, energy in Earth's atmosphere. Most of the energy in Earth's atmosphere comes from the sun. Remember that Earth is in constant contact with all of the sunlight that comes from our star in the solar system. It travels through electromagnetic waves. It can travel through vacuum. So what is vacuum? Vacuum is basically a place in which matter is almost non-existent. There is very little matter around in the outer space, okay? But light is able to travel through that because it travels through electromagnetic waves. Visible light, infrared radiation, and ultraviolet radiation are the three types of energy that come inside our atmosphere because of the light that comes from the sun. So one more time, all of the light, visible light, infrared radiation, and ultraviolet radiation comes from the light from the sun. Visible light are basically the colors that we can see. But there is much more than that. The colors that we can perceive are just a little part of the light that come inside our Earth. So non-visible radiation, we have infrared radiation, which has a longer wavelengths, and it is usually transferred into heat. And ultraviolet radiation has short wavelengths, and it can cause sunburn. So here we have a diagram of what we're talking about. So the first waves that we have are infrared radiation. And as you can see, they are a little bit longer or wider, okay? Then the one that we have right in the middle is the light that we can see with our naked eyes, which are basically all of the colors. And that is the visible light. Just like you can see, they are a little bit smaller waves than the ones in infrared radiation. And lastly, we have ultraviolet radiation, which, as you can see in the image, are very short waves. And of course, it can cause sunburn, as it was mentioned before. We have sun's energy when it reaches Earth. So what happens to the sun energy when it reaches Earth? So it is absorbed or reflected by the atmosphere. Some passes through and it reaches the surface. The energy is absorbed by different layers. Absorbed by different layers. We have, for example, that ultraviolet radiation is absorbed by the ozone that you can find in the stratosphere. And the infrared radiation is absorbed by the water vapor and the CO2 as well. So here is a diagram of what happens to sunlight when it starts interacting with our atmosphere. So let's go right at the first one. We have the thermosphere. So you can notice that in all the infrared waves, as well as the visible light and ultraviolet rays are not having any problem by going through the thermosphere. But things change a little bit when we go to the mesosphere. We can notice that now the ultraviolet radiation has problems penetrating through the mesosphere. but the infrared radiation is still going through. It changes as well when we go to the stratosphere. So in the stratosphere, you can see that way more infrared radiation and ultraviolet radiation is being absorbed, until just a very small portion of the troposphere absorbs more light, and lastly, the light goes right inside our planet Earth, and it hits the ground. Okay, we're going to continue moving with the presentation, and now we're going to talk a little bit about the troposphere. And clouds act as mirrors and reflect sunlight. That is very interesting because keep in mind that some of the rays and the energy actually stays inside the atmosphere of Earth, but some other energy is actually reflected and it goes back to space. Okay, we have scattering. Small particles in the atmosphere disperse sunlight in all directions. So sunlight does not necessarily enter in a straight way and directly hits the ground, but it is actually spread around because of the particles that we find in our atmosphere. And around 50% of all of the energy that reaches the ground is absorbed by plants and water. So keep in mind that plants need to go through the process of photosynthesis in order to create their food, but they require sunlight, of course. And of course, all of this sunlight that is coming inside our Earth, it's transformed into heat. We can see this in a pretty simple way. For example, if you stand up right under the sun for a couple of minutes, you can start feeling pretty hot, and you're going to want to find a place with some shadow in order to decrease the temperature from your body. Okay, and here I have something very interesting, which are some materials and things that we can find in Earth that actually reflect sunlight. So asphalt only reflects in between 5 to 10% of sunlight. So what does that mean? It means that it is absorbing most of the sunlight. Okay, and you have to notice that in most of the communities built up by humans have a lot of asphalt, because that is what is being used to create the streets in order for people to walk around and cars to drive around. Now let's compare it to fresh snow. 80 to 90% reflected. So that's something great, because most of the energy is not simply being absorbed by the ground, but it is simply being rejected and going back to the universe in general. We have deciduous forest, 15 to 20% reflected. So even though plants do not reflect a lot of energy, they absorb the sunlight to create their food, which is very important. And we have dry soil, from 20 to 25% reflected of the light that comes inside. Pretty interesting as well. Right guys, now we're going to jump to our evaluation. So please read and summarize pages 90 to 95. Then access the Zoom session and participate in the discussion that we are going to have. Then I'm going to give you a pin to go to a Kahoot game. So access Kahoot for an interactive game, and the first 3 places earn 1 extra point. All activities have a total of 5 points. So make sure to read the content, summarize it, and of course participate in the Zoom session. So then you can have the pin for the game. And of course, you can go ahead and participate in the game later on and earn your 5 points, or even an extra point if you're one of the first 3 places. So that has been it for today's session. Thank you for coming, guys, and I will see seeing you during the Zoom session and next week. Goodbye.